Okay, so we're going to be looking at this lesson again as we revise. Reteaching of Lesson 2, Parts of Speech, Part 2, in light of the classwork. I choose this lesson over the original Lesson 2 in that it deals with problems you had in your classwork. And so I think it would be a better way of revising Lesson 2 than the original Lesson 2. The general objectives are: 1, to define the direct object of a verb; 2, to identify the relationship between the subject and the direct object of a verb; 3, to identify what questions to ask the verb in order to find the direct object of a verb; 4, to define an adjective; 5, to identify the relationship between a noun and an adjective; 6, to define an adverb; 7, to identify the relationship between a verb and an adverb. The specific objectives are: 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a direct object of a verb is. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out what is the relationship between the subject and the direct object. 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explore 2 ways of finding out the direct object. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of the direct object. 5, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an adjective is. 6, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out what is the relationship between an adjective and a noun. 7, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of an adjective. 8, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify 5 adjectives in an oral exercise. 8, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an adverb is. 9, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to point out the relationship between an adverb and a verb. 10, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to discuss 3 examples of how an adverb may be used. 11, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify 5 adverbs in an oral exercise. So first of all, let us look at what the direct object of a verb is. Number 1, a noun or a pronoun are 2 parts of speech that may be used as the direct object of a verb. So this is important for you to remember. A noun or a pronoun are 2 parts of speech that may be used as the direct object of a verb. Number 2, the direct object and the subject of a sentence are related, for it shows what the subject is doing. For example, the preacher preaches the gospel. The gospel tells what the preacher preaches. He is preaching the gospel. Now, there are 2 ways of finding the direct object in a sentence. The direct object may be found, first of all, by asking the verb what. What is the subject of the sentence doing? The subject of the sentence, remember from the revision of the first lesson on parts of speech, part 1, may either be a noun or a pronoun. and the verb comes after that, which tells you what the noun or the pronoun is doing. So we may ask the direct object, number one, we may ask the verb rather, in order to find the direct object, what is the subject doing? And what would be related not to a person. You would not say what when you're asking concerning a person, but when you're asking concerning a thing. So, what is one way of finding out from the verb the direct object? For example, what is the preacher preaching? The answer to this question gives the direct object of the verb. The answer is the gospel, and gospel itself is a noun, and it is functioning here as the direct object of the verb preaches. The preacher preaches the gospel. Gospel is a noun. It is being used as the direct object of the verb preaches. And you find it by asking the verb preaches, what is the preacher preaching? And the answer is gospel. The is a definite article, but the noun itself, which is the direct object, is the word gospel. You may also find the direct object by asking the verb in the sentence if it is a reference to whom, that is, to a person. You will ask whom instead of what. You ask whom when you know that the direct object is dealing with a person. So you may ask, whom is the preacher preaching? The answer to this question gives the direct object of the verb. The answer is Christ. In the sentence, here is a different sentence from the first one. The preacher preaches Christ. So if you have the sentence, you ask the verb preaches, whom is the preacher preaching? Or whom is the preacher preaching about? And the answer is Christ. So you use whom in reference to a person, and you use what in reference to a thing. Now, as I go through this, if you have any question, please let me know. Is there any question so far concerning the direct object of a verb? What makes up a direct object? How you may find the direct object in a sentence? Any question on this? Anything that is still not clear? Maybe you're confused about it and you don't understand completely what I am telling you. Okay, let me move on. So here are some examples of finding the direct object in different sentences. The first sentence is, the preacher preaches the gospel. And so you ask the verb preaches, what is the preacher preaching? And the answer to that question gives you the direct object. So the direct object is gospel. Of course, you say the gospel. The is the definite article, but gospel itself is a noun, which is the direct object itself. You have a different kind of sentence, though, in number 2, because in number 2, you're not dealing with a thing, but you're dealing with a person. The preacher preaches Christ. So you will ask a different question, but similar. Since you're dealing with a person, you will ask the question, whom is the preacher preaching? And the answer gives you the direct object of the verb, Christ. The same thing is true for the rest of the sentences. For in each of the sentences from number 3 to 9, the direct object is a person. You may not readily see it in number 3, for the word world has different meanings, but I'm using it in the sense of the people who live in the world, the people who make up the world. I'm not using it in the sense of mountains and valleys and plains. I'm using it in the sense of the population that make up the world. God loved the world. So you ask the question, whom did God love? Number 4, God gave his son. And so you ask whom, since you're dealing with a person, whom did God give? His son would be the direct object. I would include his in the direct object because it is specifying that this is God's son. His is a possessive pronoun. Okay, so it is not just dealing with any son, it is dealing with God's son. Whom did God give? His son, yes.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
What if so for instance, preacher preaches the gospel and the gospel is the direct object. If I should, say for instance, circle the gospel and left out the D, would my answer still be right?
If you were to circle
The
gospel,
yeah, and left out the D.
yeah, I would still give it to you because the lesson actually tells us, going back, the lesson actually tells us that in number 1, a noun or a pronoun are two parts of speech that may be used as the direct object of a verb. Now, all the parts of a sentence are related, but specifically, either a noun or a pronoun may function as the direct object of a verb. I would give it to you whether you circled the gospel or just gospel. In the case of God gave his son, I believe that even though his is not a noun, but because son is being identified as God's son, not just any son, but God's son, that it should be part of the direct object. Okay, so that is why I include his in number 4. So you ask whom when you're dealing with a person. Whom did God give? Number 5, God sent his son. Again, whom did God send? And the answer gives you the direct object of the verb. Number 6, the apostles healed the sick. And so you ask the verb healed, whom did the apostles heal? And the answer gives you the direct object. Number 7, Saul persecuted the church. Again, you have to understand the meaning of church. When people read the church, a lot of people will be using the modern dictionary definition, meaning a place of worship where Christians meet together. But the original meaning of the word church referred to the people that Jesus Christ had saved with his precious blood and who would assemble themselves, whether it was at the temple of God at Jerusalem or in the synagogues of different towns or in Christian homes. The church referred to the people themselves. So I'm using it in that original sense, referring to people who have been saved, referring to Christians who come together. Saul persecuted the church. So you ask the verb persecuted, whom? Because the meaning of the church here is referring to a group of people whom Jesus has saved. So I'm dealing with people. Whom did Saul persecute? The answer gives you the direct object. Number 8, Saul saw Jesus. So I asked the verb saw, whom did Saul see? And the answer is Jesus, the direct object of the verb saw. Number 9, Saul heard Jesus. So I asked the verb heard, whom did Saul hear? And the answer is Jesus. So Jesus is the direct object. But to answer your question and to avoid any confusion, whether you circle gospel or the gospel, I will still give it to you as being the direct object, as being correct. But I just want you to know that the direct object may be either a noun or a pronoun. Any further question on this exercise here that you did?
Well said, sir.
All right.
Could you go over the definition of the direct object again, brother?
No problem. Okay. So the definition of the direct object is that it is a noun or a pronoun that is used after a verb. It is a noun or a pronoun that is used after a verb. For example, Denville kicked the ball. The verb is kicked, and the ball comes right after the verb.
Denville kick the ball.
And it is what got the action of the kicking. Denville kicked. Kicked what? What did Denville kick? The ball. So it is a noun. Noun here is the ball, or ball itself. Noun is ball, and it comes after the verb. So a direct object is either a noun or a pronoun that comes after a verb, immediately after a verb, which tells you what it is that Denville kicked, okay, or who it is that Denville saw. So it comes immediately after the verb. It's a noun or a pronoun that comes immediately after the verb and shows you what the verb did. Okay, now let us move on to adjectives. An adjective is another part of speech. It functions as a descriptive word. It describes a noun. Here are some examples. Examples of how an adjective describes a noun are as follows. Number 1, the genuine preacher. Notice that genuine describes preacher by showing what kind of person the preacher is. The preacher is not a hypocrite, but he is a sincere person who is following the teachings of Jesus Christ from his heart. Of course, I'm referring to the preacher in this example. I'm not referring to all preachers, but to a particular example in this lesson to bring out the meaning of the adjective genuine. So genuine means sincere. Sorry, genuine means sincere. It means that the person is not acting the part of who he is not, that he is what he seems to be. It is not just that he looks like this, but he actually is that. So he's genuine. Number 2, the Holy Scriptures. Notice that holy describes scriptures. The scriptures are holy because they were spoken by God through the Holy Spirit to men of God who wrote down what he said. And this is why these scriptures are set apart from all other writings. So the Daily Gleaner or the Sunday Gleaner is not the Holy Scriptures. These are the news reported by journalists. These are opinions that people share with the public. The Jamaica Observer is not the Holy Scriptures either, for the very same reasons that the Daily Gleaner and the Sunday Gleaner are not the Holy Scriptures. These writings didn't come from God. What makes these writings holy in the Bible is that they came from God. Oh yes, they were written by human beings, but these human beings were told what to write. They didn't write their own opinions. They did not give their own reasoning. Sometimes they even wrote things that they didn't understand, and they had to ask God for an explanation, because the information they wrote down did not come from their own minds. Sometimes the things they wrote, they would not have written it if they didn't get a command from God to write it, because they had a different view of things. So these scriptures are holy because they came from God. Whatever comes from God is holy. And the basic meaning of holy is something that is set apart from everything else. It is not common. It is not ordinary. It is different from everything else because God is the primary or the original or first author of the scriptures. So holy is an adjective. Scriptures is a noun. And holy is showing that these scriptures are set apart from all other writings. They are from God, not from human beings, even though human beings were used by God to communicate his words. Number 3, the true God. Notice that true describes the noun God. All other gods and goddesses are false. They're made up. They are imaginary. They do not actually exist in reality. Just because some people think they exist and believe they are real and do things for them doesn't therefore mean that they are real. True means that the God who has revealed himself in the Holy Scriptures is the real God, the only real God that there is. So adjectives are important. They give you more information about the noun. They describe a noun. Any question about adjectives and the relationship between an adjective and a noun?
Um, mm,
Yes, go ahead.
um, Repeat back the relationship that they have, sir, please.
Yes, the relationship between an adjective and a noun is that an adjective describes a noun.
Yeah.
It tells you something more about a noun.
Yes.
For example, let us say that you are preaching in the congregation right where you are staying, and you are dressed in a jacket, you have a tie, you have shirt and pants, you have a Bible in your hand. Now, if a person is going to have a mental picture of what you look like, they will need to use some adjectives. So they might say, Nicholas has a black jacket. He has a white shirt under the jacket. He has a black tie and black pants. And the Bible has a black cover. He has black shoes that are shining and sparkling. So when you use adjectives, you get a mental picture of what the noun looks like. So that is what an adjective does. It describes. it tells you something about how the noun looks.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, let us move on. If you have another question that comes, I'll come back to it.
Okay, sir.
Now let us look at this classwork that you did, and we went through it in the reteaching of this lesson. Clarification of adjective based on the classwork. Number 1, the true God loved the world. The adjective describes the noun. The noun is God. The adjective usually comes immediately before the noun. Which word in sentence 1 describes the noun God? So I ask you, Nicholas,
Yes, sir.
which word in sentence number 1 describes the noun God?
True, sir.
Correct. True is the adjective, and it tells you what God is, that he is true, he is real. Number 2, the genuine preacher preaches the gospel. The noun is preacher. So, Denville, this question is yours. Which word comes immediately before preacher?
Genuine.
That's correct. So that is the adjective.
Mhm.
That is the adjective.
Mhm.
There is another way in which the adjective could be written. And that is, it could come after the word is, the verb to be. You could write it like this. The preacher is genuine.
Mhm.
Okay, the preacher is genuine. When you have an adjective that comes after the verb is, that is called the predicate use of the adjective. Whatever comes after the verb is called predicate. But you don't have to really bother yourself about the meaning of predicate. I just want you to be aware that the word adjective, the position of the adjective in relation to the noun can either be 1, right before the noun, or after the word is. Okay, so genuine is correct. Number 3, this is for Nicholas. The Holy Scriptures were spoken by God and written down by men. The noun is scriptures. Which word comes immediately before scriptures and describes them?
Holy.
Correct, and that is the adjective. Number 4 is for Denville. The sinful world needs salvation. The noun is world. Which word comes immediately before the noun and describes it?
Oh, simple.
Correct. So sinful is an adjective.
Simple, okay.
And Nicholas, the blameless Jesus died for sinners. The noun is Jesus. This is a proper noun, personal name. And the noun is Jesus. Which word comes immediately before the noun and describes him?
Blameless.
That's correct. So you see, an adjective gives you more information about the noun. Okay, so it is not only God, but it is the true God. It is not just the preacher, but the genuine preacher. It is not just the scriptures, but the holy scriptures. It is not just the world, but the sinful world. It is not just Jesus, but the blameless Jesus. The adjective gives you more information about the noun. It tells you what kind of noun it is, or he is, or she is. Any question on the adjective? Okay, we move on now to another part of speech. and that is adverbs. An adverb describes a verb. Now notice there is something that adjectives and adverbs have in common. First of all, notice that in both adjectives and adverbs, it begins with two letters. Can you tell me the two letters, Nicholas?
Sir, the screen not changing, sir.
What happened? Can you see the screen?
No, sir.
You can't see the screen.
No, I'm seeing it, but I'm saying that it hasn't changed as yet from the based on the class homework. And your connection is bad, so I don't know. I'm not hearing anything you're saying now.
Are you saying that we still are on the adjective screen? Yeah.
Oh, see, them man in connection, but man.
When I hear anybody Buckland, there's no audio.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Seems like it was your connection, sir, having bad connection.
Oh, mine?
Yes.
Oh,
That caused you to come out the meeting a while ago.
okay. Okay, let us get back. So we're now on adverbs. So Nicholas, what does adjective and adverb have in common? That is specifically what two letters are at the beginning of the two words?
Sorry.
Yes. AD. Of course, the word add is ADD, but AD will give you some idea about what these two words are doing. The adjective adds more information about the noun in telling you what kind of noun, what kind of person, what kind of place, what kind of thing it is. The adverb does something similar. It tells you more information about what the verb is doing. The verb is partly a doing word. So the adverb is describing a verb, telling you more about what it is doing and how it is doing and when it is doing and where it is doing. It gives you more information about the verb. So number one, an adverb describes a verb. Number two, for example, one, the preacher preaches the gospel effectively. Effectively describes preaches, the verb, by showing how or the way or the manner in which the preacher preaches. Number two, the preacher preaches the gospel today. Today preaches, the verb, by showing when the preacher preaches. Three, the preacher drove the car easterly. Easterly describes drove, the verb, by showing where the preacher drove. So the adverb describes a verb. Many adverbs in English end in ly. So that's one way you can identify the adverb. Look for words that end with ly. They're usually adverbs, but not all words end in ly. For example, in number 2, today, it does not end in ly. Okay, so the meaning of an adverb is that it describes a verb. An adjective describes a noun, and an adverb describes a verb. Any question on adverbs? Okay, let us look at this exercise and the use of the adverbs based on the classwork that you did some time ago. Number 1, God greatly loved the world. The adverb describes the verb. The verb is loved. Which word describes how much God loved? Nicholas?
Greatly.
Correct, so that is the adverb. Number 2, the preacher preaches the gospel enthusiastically. The verb is preaches. Which word describes the way?
Huh? Signal bad, yeah.
Let's see if we can finish this without any further incident.
Yes.
Okay. So number 2, the preacher preaches the gospel enthusiastically. The verb is preaches. Which word describes the way in which the preacher preaches? Denville?
Enthusiastically.
Correct. Number 3, the Philippian jailer was baptized immediately. The verb is was baptized. Which word describes when the Philippian jailer was baptized? Nicholas?
Immediately.
Correct. So that is the adverb. Was baptized is the verb and immediately describes when the baptism took place. Number 4, the Lord added the saved to the church daily. The verb is added. Which word describes the rate of the addition of new persons to the church?
Daily.
Denville?
Daily.
Correct. Number 5, Jesus is coming soon. The verb is coming. Which word describes when Jesus is coming? Nicholas?
Soon.
Correct. So this is what an adverb does. It tells you how something is done. It tells you when something is done. It tells you the rate at which something is done. So it tells you something more about the action of the verb. Okay, so we have revised lesson 2. And that is what we have time for today. Now, next week, God permitting, we're going to revise. Next week would be the final week of revision, I believe. So next week, we will revise lesson 3, parts of speech, part 3, and also lessons 4 and 5, which deals with the present tense verb. Any question on lesson 2 before we go?
Also, that's
Okay, now if you haven't started revising, remember that the exam is going to be comprehensive. It's going to be over lessons 1 to 5. Lessons 1 to 3 deals with the parts of speech, and lessons 4 and 5 deal with the present tense verb. Okay, so make sure that you start to revise. So next week we will revise the remaining lessons, lessons 3, 4, and 5.
yeah.
You think we'll get to it? Oh, I'm gone already.
Hello,
Oh,
Nicola?
I think you're good at that. So we'll get to revise those for next week because based on my knowledge, the exam will start like when? Like
The week after next week.
week after
Okay,
next?
let me see if we started late. I'm going to see if I can do lesson 3 quickly now so we can devote next week just to the present tense. So let me just get into my resources here, beginners communication studies. So lesson 3. I'm coming. It's down here. That's it. Okay, let me try and revise lesson 3 so it won't be such a rush next week, God permitting. All right. All right, I'm going to share the screen and quickly bring up that other lesson. Show all windows. This is it. Okay, let me revise this one. This is lesson 3, parts of speech, part 3, known as the indirect object, preposition, conjunction, and interjection. To examine the indirect object of a verb, to examine prepositions, to examine conjunctions, to examine interjections. At the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an indirect object is. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the indirect object in different sentences. Number 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a preposition is. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the preposition in different sentences. And 5, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what a conjunction is. At the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the conjunction in different sentences. 8, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to explain what an interjection is. 9, at the end of this lesson, the students will have been able to identify the interjection in different sentences. So the indirect object is a noun or a pronoun. Just like the direct object can be a noun or a pronoun, the indirect object is a noun or a pronoun which comes after the direct object of a verb. It doesn't come after the verb immediately, but it comes after the direct object of a verb. 2, the indirect object is given something or someone by the subject through the direct object of a verb. 3, the indirect object is identified by the word to or for, followed by a noun or a pronoun. So you can recognize the indirect object because it is introduced by the word to or the word for. Number 4, for example, the preacher preaches the gospel to the audience. Audience is a noun. It comes after the direct object, gospel, another noun. The subject, preacher, preaches the gospel, and the gospel is meant to be given to the audience. The audience is given the gospel, and this is identified by the indirect object to the audience. Okay, now it is not really, I'm not able to finish the lesson, so I'll continue this revision of this lesson next week, along with the remaining 2 lessons, lessons 4 and 5 in the present tense. Okay, so I will see you later for Hebrew, God willing.
Okay.
All right, take care.
All right, thank you.